Well, if you're new to our church, let me just tell you what we typically do around here is we explore these big ideas in what we call teaching series. Now, a teaching series is basically one long message that we break up into 3, 4, 5 parts, and we teach one part every week because truth is, we know none of y'all want to hear us talk that long. And so today, we come to part 3 of a 3-part series. It's our final week in this series. So if you're just joining in and you haven't caught parts 1 and 2, some of what I talk about today might sound a little bit out of context. So I encourage you to go back and see parts 1 and 2 on our website or on our app. But I'm going to really do my best and try and connect it all for you today to bring it all home as we wrap this series up. Now, the big idea of this series has been that there's really one mission that God has left with His followers, followers of Jesus. And what we're learning is these simple, practical steps that we can take to accomplish the mission that Jesus left with us, His followers. And if you don't know, the one mission that Jesus left us with is He says, I want you to go into the whole world, as far out as you can go. He said, I want you to share the good news of what God has done in the world, that God has done something new for the world, that God had come into the world in the person of Jesus Christ, His Son, and that He had made a way for every single person to find their way back to God. You know, Jesus died on the cross, and He rose from the dead again so that you and I could do the same, that we could live eternally and defeat death in this brand new world that God would bring about, where justice and love would be done perfectly, just the way that every single one of us longs for it to be done. And it's the greatest news that the world has ever known, that the world's ever heard. And so we want to be the kind of people who bless our world with sharing that good news with every single person that we come in contact with. And the way that we've gone about doing this is we use the word bless as sort of a way to help us remember the simple steps that we can take to bless the world around us, the people that we come in contact with in our work, in our daily lives, in the places that we go and the places that we hang out. And so I want to review real quick those steps for you so that we can get up to what we're going to talk to today. That word bless that we've been using, the B, we said, stands for begin with prayer. And here's what that means is that we start every single day by saying this prayer to God. God, would you show me who you want me to bless today? Very simple prayer and really a very simple task. God, bring people into my path or bring scenarios and situations into my life today. And as you do that, God, would you just remind me that I need to bless these people in these circumstances that I find myself in every single day? Where can I share the love that you've shown me with the people around me? And we pray that prayer all the time, every day. And then the L, we said, stands for listen. And that simply means that we want to be the kind of people that are interested in the lives and the stories of the people around us. And so we don't just talk all the time. We listen. We open ourselves up and we engage in conversation. And we listen to the struggles and the pains and the challenges that people go through. We care. We ask questions so that we can enter into the lives of the people around us. And then the E, we said, stands for eat, which is my favorite one because this is the one that I'm really the best at, and I would assume most of y'all are too. But we learned about this last week, that if we're going to enter into people's lives and we're going to build relationships with people and care and love them, we need to share a meal with them. We need to eat with people, not just pray for them, not just listen to them. And then finally, last week, we talked about the S is for serve. And we said, as we engage with people, that we begin to actually do something to meet their needs, that as we encounter folks in our lives, we come to know that there are folks all around us that have needs, and we can be an answer to their prayers, and we can serve them in all kinds of different ways. And so that's what the first S stands for. But as I'm sure you notice, there's another S in the word bless, and that's what we're going to talk about today, which is the final step, the final practical way that we can go about blessing the world. So the final S today stands for share the story. And you may be asking, well, what story are we talking about? Well, it's simple. Share the story of what God has done for the world. And more importantly, share the story of what God has done for you and for me personally. Now, let me start with a question and bring up a quote on the screen. How many of you have ever seen this quote somewhere along the way? It's this quote that says, preach the gospel. Now, if you're not familiar with that word, the gospel just means the good news about what Jesus has done, his death and his resurrection, and the good news of what God has done in our world. And that's all gospel means. Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. Now, that's a quote that's been floating around, at least in Christian circles, for quite some time. It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. He was one of the early church fathers. Some people have said that they're not even sure he's the one that originally said that, but he gets quoted that way a lot of times. That's really not the point. The point is this. That quote, as you see it right now on the screen, that's actually a misquoting of the original phrase. There's actually one tiny word that's been changed over the years, and I believe that one tiny word has changed the entire meaning of that phrase. In fact, I think it's destroyed the meaning of that phrase, and it's the word if. Now, I'll tell you why I'm pretty sure someone along the way changed the word or stuck that word in there, because let's be truthful. When it comes to talking to people about faith, talking to people in our world about matters of faith and the story of Jesus and the gospel, the good news, it's quite honestly probably the least favorite thing most people want to do. In fact, it's the thing that we all want to run from. I mean, you probably heard this said many, many times. The one thing you don't talk about with your friends or your family is faith and politics. And so we steer away from those things. And so when it comes to matters of faith, we all just kind of want to shy away from that whole idea of speaking out and talking about our faith. And so this quote, as it's written, is basically getting us off the hook. It's saying, hey, look, you can preach the gospel, but you don't ever have to say a word. You can just live your life. You can love people. You can serve people. You can just do all of that stuff. And if you'll just do that, you don't ever have to say a word. They'll just get it. They'll just be drawn to Jesus. And most of us like that idea because, again, it makes us feel better, and we don't have to speak up or say anything. So someone actually changed that word if. Here's actually how the quote was originally said. Preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. See, at some point, it really becomes necessary for followers of Jesus to use words in order to share the story of what God has done through Jesus in our world. And it's the same thing for us. At some point, if we're going to be serious about the mission that Jesus gave us to go into all the world and to share the gospel, share the good news with every person we come in contact with, there's going to come a point where we have to not just do actions, but we have to speak words. We have to share the story. We have to say something. We have to speak up. Because think about it, you would never say this about pretty much any other area of life other than this one. For example, you would never say to a relief worker working in a famine where people were starving, hey, go feed the hungry and if necessary, use food. You would never say to someone, a doctor, hey, go care for the sick and if necessary, use medicine. Or to a comedian, hey, make people laugh and if necessary, tell jokes. I mean, it's ridiculous when I put it in those terms, I know. But most of us Christians, that's how we approach this whole topic. We shy away from speaking up and telling the story of Jesus. In fact, one of the very earliest followers of Jesus said it this way. He said, how can they call on Jesus to save them unless they believe in him? How can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? But now, I think most of us already know this. I mean, come on, let's think about this. If you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, at some point in your life, you decided to give your life to Jesus to make him the leader of your life, my guess is you didn't come by that out of the blue on your own. I mean, you didn't just wake up one day and then all of a sudden you knew the story of Jesus and what God had done for you through him, and you just decided all by yourself that you were going to give your life to him. I guarantee you there was someone who spoke up. There was someone who spoke Jesus' name in your presence or told the story of what he had done for you, and they helped you come to faith in Jesus. None of us came to this by ourselves. And that's why this step is so important for all of us to get. And I just want to say up front, I know it's hard, and I know it's intimidating, and I know most of us, we don't like it, and we just want to shy away from this, but we have to figure this out. Let me read something that the Apostle Peter wrote. And remember, Peter was one of the guys that spent probably more time with Jesus than anyone. And he said it this way. He said, If someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way. And that's all we're going to be learning about today. That's what I want us to learn. How do I share the story? And how do I use my words to explain that hope that I've been given through Jesus as a follower of His? And how do I do that in a way that's gentle, in a way that's respectful? And I just tell you, the best way that I know to share the story of what Jesus has done for the world is we need to start by sharing the story of what Jesus has done for us, personally. See, every follower of Jesus has a story. That means if you follow Jesus, you've got a story. I have a story. And we need to share that story with our neighbors, with our friends, with our coworkers, with the people that we're with every single day. After you've prayed, after you've listened, after you've shared a meal, after you've served the needs of the people around you, at some point, you need to share your personal story of what God has done for you through Jesus. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. You're thinking, I don't really have much of a story, and I'm not even sure what my story would be if I had one. And let me just say, it's really, really simple. Think of it this way. There are 3 parts to your story. You've got a before Jesus story. In other words, what was your life like before you came to know Jesus? What were the thoughts that you thought? What were the feelings that you were feeling? What were the things that were important to you at that point in your life? What were the things that weren't important to you at that stage in your life? What was your life like before Jesus? Then there's a second part to your story, and that's your encounter with Jesus. In other words, how did you come to faith in Jesus? How did you find your way back to God? What brought you to that moment? What were the people who were involved? What were the circumstances that were involved in that? And then there's a third part to your story, and that's the after Jesus part. How's your life different now that you're a Jesus follower? What changes has He made in your life? What thoughts do you have that are different now? And listen, it doesn't mean that your story after Jesus is all roses and rainbows. In fact, I would expect that it's not. It doesn't have to be perfect. But if you're truly following Jesus, here's the truth. You're different. Your life has changed because following Jesus makes a difference in your life, not just for eternity, but right here and right now. And so we need to tell that part of our story as well. And in just a moment, I want to get real specific with you. I want to help you to learn how to tell your story in just a minute. But before we do that, there's something else I think is just as important, if not more important. And I want to say a few warnings about this because I've been doing this for a while. I've been around plenty of Christians, and I've asked Christians to tell me their stories. And let me just say this right out front. I don't mean to sound offensive by saying what I'm about to say, but I have to be truthful. I've listened to a lot of Christians tell their stories, and for the vast majority of the stories that I've heard, most of them just suck. And I don't know any other way to say that. They're just not that very good. In fact, up until recently, mine wasn't very good. And so we need to work on these things. There's just some things that I hear and I see people doing when they tell the story of their faith story that it's just not good, not at all. So let me give you some warnings, some tips on this. And the first one's real important, might be the most important one of all. For the love of God and for the love of everybody listening to your story, make it short. I mean, come on. Every time I ask somebody, hey, tell me how you came to faith in Jesus and tell me your faith story, almost every one of them is too long. You know, they start out and I'm just asking them to tell me a 2 or 3 minute story, and about halfway through it, I feel like I need a bathroom break. I mean, it's so long. And I get it. You think that every detail in your story matters and that everybody's interested in it. Trust me, they're not. I mean, nobody wants to hear every single detail. I mean, and the other thing that I want you to understand is when you're telling your story to someone, you're not just telling a story. You want to have a conversation. And see, if you tell every single detail, there's no place to talk. If you leave some things out, here's what I found. If you'll leave some things out that are just sort of peripheral to the story, there's room for people to ask you questions. There's things to follow up on. There's things to explain later in the conversation. And see, it's a give and take. And so now we're not just having me talk to you about myself. We're actually having a conversation about faith and about things that matter. And that's what we want. Because remember, the goal here is not telling your story. The goal really is the mission of sharing Jesus with my friend. I want my friend to know Jesus and what the difference He's made in my life and other people. Now, I think there's a reason why most of us can't tell our stories real briefly. And it's this. Most of us haven't put any work into it. Most of us just kind of think, well, it's my story. I'm the one that knows it. I should be able to just tell it off the cuff and whenever I need to and just off the top of my head. And trust me, that's not how you do it. In order to be brief, you have to put some work into it. I mean, they give me 35 minutes to talk in these messages each and every week. And I'll tell you, it takes work to get my words down to 35 minutes because there's a lot of, trust me, there's a lot of stuff that I could say that I can't say. And most all of it I think is really, really good. Trust me, it ain't. You wouldn't want to hear it because it's just not important. So it takes work sometimes to whittle it all down, to get it to just the stuff that's important and the stuff that really matters. So when you tell your story, you need to tell it briefly. And in order to tell it briefly, you need to put some work into it. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But let me give you warning number 2, and it's this. Be clear when you tell your story. See, I hear a lot of faith stories from people that are not just long, they're fuzzy. They're confusing. It's like you start out saying, well, you know, when I was back in college, and then you wind up talking about your first grade teacher, and it's like all over the place, and then you've got like 50 different people in your story and all the books that you've read, and then there's this really weird supernatural experience that I had in the middle of the night, which, by the way, and this is a side note, don't do that either. I mean, that's not helpful to anybody. Don't talk about weird stuff like angels showing up in your kitchen or dead relatives that you talk to. I mean, nobody wants to hear that weird stuff, and that's not what people care about anyway. I mean, trust me, I've got God stories. I've got stories in my life where I could tell you that are like really unexplainable kind of things that I believe God did supernaturally through my life, but I don't whip those out for strangers because really at the end of the day, what people care about most is, hey, what difference has Jesus made in your life, and would it even matter to me? So don't tell your weird God stories. Just keep it clear, keep it normal, have one plot line, and do that one clear, compelling message. Here's another warning. Number 3, use normal language. And here's what I mean by that is, if you follow Jesus any length of time, you'll wind up with speaking what I call Christianese. And what that means is that there's just some phrases that we Christians have that we use a lot, and they don't mean anything to anybody but us. I mean, if you're not a part of a church or you're not connected to a faith community, some of these phrases just don't make any sense. Try not to use language that other people just won't understand. Like, for example, you'll say something like this. Well, I got saved when I was 15. And to someone outside of a faith community, they're thinking to themselves, saved from what? Like, were you drowning? Or, you know, it's just a simple phrase that we use, but it just doesn't have a whole lot of meaning outside of a faith community. Here's another one. The blood of the Lamb has covered my sins. And people outside the faith community, they're thinking, that sounds like a horror movie I once watched. And it wasn't even a good one. But now, internally, that may mean something to you, but it just doesn't mean anything to people on the outside. So if you're a longtime follower of Jesus, man, we just need to remember this. I mean, sometimes we forget. You know, about 80% of our country doesn't attend church regularly. They're not connected to a faith community. And there are some things that we know and we say that when they hear it, doesn't make sense. So we need to ask that question all the time. Are the words that I'm using, are they helpful? Are they clear? Do they make sense? Because listen, we owe it to the people we know and love to communicate clearly to them. So think about it. Do the hard work of taking out all this religious sounding language, because again, that's not what's important. What's important is that we communicate the story of what Jesus has done for us and for the world. Number 4, don't talk down to people. Now, this is a tendency that I see in a lot of Christians a lot of times. We have this tendency to, when we talk about our faith, to give the impression to the people around us that we've got it all together and the rest of the world doesn't. It's like we get this idea that somehow I've arrived. I've found the secret to life, or I've found the secret to morality, and all the rest of the world is missing out. In fact, I'm over here, and I've got my life all together, and everybody else is just running down a highway to hell. And I'm telling you, if you ever want to shut down a conversation with someone, give them a hint that that's what you think. As soon as you do that, conversation is over. And see, what we really have to remember as followers of Jesus is simply this. You, me, and everybody you know, we're all a work in progress. There are no perfect people. And the fact is, I didn't get into this relationship with God because I did something to earn it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I got it as a free gift that I didn't deserve. I got it in spite of me. In fact, if you want to know what I deserve hell. because of what I'd done and the sin that I had committed, but because of God's grace and God's love, he so loved me that he sent his son for me. So I'm no different than anybody else. So I don't have any reason to be superior or to act superior, and neither do you. So when you tell your story, make sure you tell it briefly, tell it clearly, tell it sincerely, and tell it humbly. So those are my warnings, okay? Now I want to get to the part where I want to talk to you about how to craft your story and how to share it with the people in your life, because this is so important. Look at this verse from the Bible. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, and a new life has begun. See, when we become Christians, we become these new people. There's something that's changed about us. We're not the same anymore. The old life is gone. New life has begun. In other words, that old you, that person you were before you met Jesus, has now become a new you. So when you tell your story, all that anybody really cares about and all that you should really care about is the answer to this question. Does following Jesus make a difference in a human life? Does it really, really matter? Has being a follower of Jesus changed you at all? And see, this is true with just about everything you talk about with your friends. For example, if tomorrow one of your friends came up to you and said, man, I found this great new diet. I've been following this for 3 months. It's amazing. What's the one thing you want to know? How much weight have you lost, right? Because everything else, it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter what food you're supposed to eat or what food you're not supposed to eat on this great diet. All I really care about is, does it work? What's the old you? What did the old you weigh? And what's the new you weigh now? Because if that doesn't work, I don't even care about your diet. It's the same thing with Jesus. When you get a chance to tell someone why you're fired up about your relationship with Christ, all you need to talk about is this. Hey, look, here's what I had going on before I started a relationship with Jesus. This is what life was like. Here's how it got started. And now here's what's different. Here's what's been going on ever since. And listen, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It just needs to be true. It just needs to be real and honest and focused and brief and all the things that we've talked about. And it needs to make sense. I'll give you a few examples of what I'm talking about straight from Scripture, okay? One time Jesus met a man who was blind. He had been blind since birth, never seen before. And, of course, he has this dramatic encounter with Jesus, and Jesus healed the man, and he can see again. And so after he's healed, the man goes back to his hometown, to the people that he knows, and they start asking him, hey, you had this encounter with Jesus. Tell us about him. What do you know about Jesus? And he says, guys, I don't know anything about this guy other than this. I was blind, I met Jesus, now I can see. That's it. Now, can you imagine how many times this guy in his life told that story? You know, he'd be standing at a dinner party meeting somebody and say, you know something, you should probably follow Jesus. And they go, why should I do that? He says, because I'm telling you, I was blind, I met Jesus, now I see. Another time, Jesus encountered a woman. She had just been caught in the act of adultery. You know, the authority, if you know the story, these authorities went in and grabbed her out of the act of committing adultery, brought her out into the street, and they were going to stone her because that's what the law in their day said they could do. And then Jesus stepped in and he confronted these religious leaders, and they decided not to kill her. And then Jesus looks at this woman and he says, and neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave that life that you've begun to live and live a new life. I'm giving you a new chance, a fresh start. Go live a new life. Can you imagine how many times she told that story to her friends and family? She would have said, you know, I reached a low point in my life, and I was doing shameful things with shameful people in shameful ways. I was cheating on my husband. I was destroying my family. And then I met Jesus. And all he shared with me was love and grace. He didn't condemn me like everyone else did. And he gave me a fresh start and said I could be a new person. And so from that point on, I've lived a different kind of life. And it's all because I met him. Can you imagine how many times she told that story? Or how about a guy from the Bible? His name's Zacchaeus. I grew up singing songs about this guy. Basically, the story is this. Zacchaeus was all about money. He was all about greed, and he didn't care who he had to hurt or to steal from to get it. And then one day Jesus comes into his hometown and he has dinner with Zacchaeus. And as a result of that dinner, Zacchaeus walked away from that dinner and he said, Jesus, I'm going to pay back everything that I've stolen and extorted from people. And in fact, I'm going to take half of what I own and I'm going to give it to help serve the poor in my community. Can you imagine him telling that story for the rest of his life? About how, man, I was tied into greed. It had a grip on me and I couldn't break it. I didn't care who I hurt. It isolated me from all of my relationships. And then I met Jesus and he changed my focus. And now I'm free from the tyranny of greed. And now I care about people and I'm freed up to love, especially the poor in my community. And that's what Jesus has done for me. How many times do you think he told that story? Here's my story. I grew up in church. And all my growing up years, I was all about studying the Bible. In fact, I learned as much as I could. I studied it like a textbook. And along the way, I got the idea that the only way I was going to ever be able to please God was if I kept his rule book completely and perfectly. And not only that, I needed to be around people who kept his rule book completely and perfectly. And you know what I found out of that, living that life that way, approaching life that way? Isolation from God and isolation from people. And it was exhausting because I was trying to live based on a standard that I couldn't keep. In fact, nobody around me could do it either, and it was just exhausting. And then I met Jesus, and I realized that Jesus never truly asked his followers to be perfect. He never expected them to be perfect. That there was nothing that I could ever do that would make God love me more. There was nothing that I could stay away from that would make God love me less. And all of that came clear to me. And so now I don't live my life to earn God's love. I live my life resting in God's love. And I'll tell you one thing, it has made all the difference. I now live with a peace that I can't even describe to you. So here's what I want you to do. Here's your assignment. I want to challenge every Christ follower here today to sit down this week, and I want you to work on your story. And it's very simple. Here's all you need to do. Start by coming up with a word. Come up with a phrase that describes you and your life before you met Jesus. And then come up with a word or another phrase that describes your life after you met Jesus. Mine, you just heard it. My life before Jesus was exhausted, trying to earn God's love. But then after was peace and rest. For some of you, you would say your life before is like all about fear. You were so afraid of everything, but Jesus came into the picture and he gave you confidence. Some of you might say that your life was about image management and fame and impressing other people, and then you met Jesus, and now it's about serving and the freedom to love other people without feeling the need to impress them. Some of you would say, before Jesus, I had nothing but loneliness, and now I've met Jesus and I've been adopted into his family and I belong and I'm one of his kids. And don't speed through this. I want you to take some time and think about this. Think about what are your two words, what are your two phrases, and then when you come up with them, build your story around that. And again, follow all the warnings that I gave you. Keep it brief, keep it humble, keep it focused. Stay away from religious language. Now, you may be thinking, well, I'm not sure I know exactly how to do this. Well, I want to give you some examples to help you with this. I want you to see examples of what a good story sounds like. Now, these stories you're going to hear today are real. They're real people right here in our church, and basically we gave them the same challenge I'm giving to you. We just came to them a couple of weeks ago, and we said, hey, work on your story and tell us your story. And I want you to listen to these, and as you do, I want you to listen for those three parts, the before Jesus, the encounter with Jesus, the after Jesus. I want you to listen for those phrases. I want you to notice that they're short, that they're humble, but the most important thing is I want you to see who's the hero of this story. Let's watch this together.
Before I totally committed my life to Jesus, I'd always gone to church and thought I had everything together. Funny but true, sometimes God needs us to commit to Him and put our trust in Him totally. At a tragic point in my life, I realized that and gave Him total control of my life. Since that time, even though my life is not perfect, I have a friend who is always constant, always loving, and always patient with me every step of the way.
Growing up, I didn't understand what the point of church was. I did all the religious activities, Yet all that stood out was the fear of going to hell. Eventually, my dad took us to a new church where I was amazed that I actually understood the message. God was looking for me. His son, Jesus, came to earth to die for me. I was baptized, and since then it's been quite a life. Some downs, but plenty of ups. The life and love Jesus has for me gives me strength every day to serve and love others.
Growing up, my family didn't really talk much about Jesus, but demonstrated some of his characteristics, along with some of the opposite characteristics. I cared about people, but only until they disappointed me, and would usually distance myself afterward. When Jesus became the focus, I saw that people weren't a means to an end, but a part to a bigger whole. Doing life with him has made life better. Not easier, but definitely better.
Lost in darkness, full of hatred and anger, I despised the world and everyone in it. I tried the church thing before, however, I was just going through the motions. I wouldn't open myself up to God, figured he needed to fix my life first. Then one day, Jesus showed me that I was what needed to be fixed. After fully submitting to God and opening myself up to growth and change, I began to embrace people. I went from surviving life to living it.
I grew up in the church knowing Christ, but I struggled with trying to be perfect. Over the years, he's truly helped me with my holier-than-thou attitude and revealed that I'm not perfect, nor do I have to be. Today, I am grateful that I'm not the judge or jury and can love myself and others where we are without any judgment.
My whole life, I felt like I was not enough to be loved, so I followed other people looking for acceptance and ended up getting hurt multiple times, which just reinforced the idea that maybe I was not worthy. Then someone from church suggested I read the book of John and focus on Jesus. That's when I learned how much he loves me, that he was willing to give his life for me. In his eyes, I am worthy. Now, because of Jesus, I know what love really looks like.
Well, if you're a follower of Jesus here today, the one thing that I hope that you came away from that video from it, the one thing that I hope that you would say to yourself after hearing those stories is this: I can do that. I mean, I think I can do that, because the truth is, you can. You really can do this. And I so hope that each and every one of us will do it, because this is worth it. It matters so much. Guys, if we're going to be a church who blesses the world around us, blesses our community, we've got to figure this out. This has to be a part of our strategy to bless our community. How can they believe in him if they've never heard? And how can they hear if nobody tells them? We've got to tell them. So, I want to challenge you one more time. I want you to take the next 7 days from now until next Sunday, and I want you to get this assignment done. I want you to work on your stories and see. We want to help you, and I'm going to give you some practical things. This one practical thing that we want to do to help you write your story and craft a story that's good and compelling and brief. So between now and next Sunday, I want you to, again, sit down, write out your story, make it about 100 words. You're thinking, well, how long is that? Well, it should probably take you about 2 minutes or less to say it out loud. So if it's that long, you're good. But when you finish typing it out, whatever length you wind up with, here's what I want you to do. I want you to email it to us. And here's how you'll do that. I'm going to put an email address on the screen right now. mystory@community-christian.net. mystory@community-christian.net. And here's what will happen. You send us your story. Our staff is going to read every single one of these, okay? Someone from our staff will read it. And we'll be looking for all of the things that we talked about today. We want to make sure it's short, that it's clear, that it's humble, that it doesn't have weird stuff in it. And if all of that's true, here's what's going to happen. We're going to send you back a reply. And we're going to say, hey, way to go. Good job. You're free to go. Go share that story with the people in your life. However, if you send us a story that is not, it violates one of those things, okay, and it's not complete, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be gentle, okay, I promise. We're not going to be mean. Well, we'll send you back some suggestions. We'll tell you, hey, work on this. This needs to change, or this needs to be different. And we'll work on this together until we get it right so that you can feel confident in sharing your story with the people in your life. So I just to remind you, because we've been saying this for the whole series, we've also put together a website to help you with this. We've got information, we've got tips on how to do this, all of the things that we've covered so far in the B.L.E.S.S series. So I'll bring that up on the screen as well. It's community-christian.net/bless. In fact, I printed it on your program today. You should have gotten one of those when you came in the door. This is a website that we put up for you so that you can have this information, not just during this series, but we want this to become something that we do all year long, something that becomes a lifestyle for us, that we are constantly thinking and praying and figuring out how we can bless the community around us. So use that as a resource for you. You'll find all kinds of tips. You'll find that email address that I just shared with you so you can send us your story. All the stuff we've talked about in the B.L.E.S.S series you'll find on that website. I can't say this enough. This is so very important, guys. I mean, we need to do this. We need to all work on our stories this week. I hope you'll do that because it's worth the time. It's worth the effort for us to get it right. And I'll tell you why. Because your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, the people that you are around every day, they are counting on you to be prepared to give the reason for the hope that lies within you. Because here's the truth. For some of those people, your story is going to be the only story they may ever hear about what a difference Jesus makes in a life. And so you owe it to your friends, to your family, to the people around you to get this right. Let's all do this together. Come on, guys. Let's be a church that prays every day, God, who do you want me to bless today? Let's be a church that listens to the stories of the people in our lives. Let's have meals together. Let's serve them any way that we can. And then finally, when the time is right, let's share our stories. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for the privilege that you've invited us on this mission, this adventure with you in this world, to bless the people around us with the good news of what you have done for every single person. So God, help us to be prepared when the time comes to share the hope that we have, that you've given us as a free gift because you've loved us the way you do. God, help us as we leave here today and we go out into our communities. Help us to be a blessing to those around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.